Is the car you are driving right now the last car you will ever own? And if it's not the last car, will the next car be the last car you ever own? The whole idea of owning a vehicle, owning a car, is what I'm going to explore briefly in this episode of The New Normal. We have seen in the last 15 years or so a shift generally to our behavior and thinking about owning things. All of us have grown up in a consumer age where we're kind of measured by, or believe our success is defined by, the things we own, the things we can have. And even as we've become more digital, there's still this idea we want to own something. But we saw the first major industry to be impacted by the internet and everything that was possible with the internet was entertainment. First music, and then later movies, as bandwidth became cheaper and more accessible. So as soon as music could be digitized, it could now be shared across the internet. And in the late 1990s, 1999 in fact, we had the rise of file sharing services like Napster, which allowed people to share their music libraries. And up until that point, and for some years afterward, there was this idea of owning music on CD. And people would hoard CDs. They would have shelves full of CDs that they've owned. And while you can be very proud of owning 600 CDs, it can be a little unwieldy, because if you're looking to listen to one song by one particular artist, it can be hard to find, as anybody who's trawled through 600 CDs has found. But then iTunes came, digital music, and this allowed us to easily purchase music, download it. Now we could carry it around on an iPod or have it on a hard drive. So instead of owning physical CDs, now we were owning electronic copies of music, but on hard drives. And then as movies became something we want to own, instead of owning DVDs, we would have hard drives filled with movies. So we've seen a shift away from owning physical music or entertainment to just having access. Now, if you subscribe to a service like iTunes or Spotify or Google Play Music, you have access to the world's music. And at any moment, you can talk to your device and say, play me this song by this artist, and it will play, and you have access to it. So our whole view of ownership has shifted there, and we're starting to see it affect other areas of ownership, or this idea that you have to have something in order to have ownership. Why not just have access? So are we seeing that shift in vehicle ownership? There's a lot of anecdotal stories about this sort of thing. We hear that in Europe, young people are becoming more averse to owning cars because they feel they're kind of wasteful, they're not great for the environment, and you pay for a car 24 hours a day, and you're only using it for about 2 hours a day. But are we going to arrive at a time where people no longer own cars and rather just have access to transport? If you need to go somewhere and be somewhere, you've got access to it when you need it, on demand. How is this actually impacting car ownership? So I had a conversation with Chavez Govender, who's the head of strategic partnerships and enterprise for Uber in South Africa. And for Uber, over the last few years, they've become the standard for an industry-changing idea, something that revolutionized an entire industry. And it's interesting that they've now to a point where perhaps they might be disrupted themselves. But nevertheless, I had a chat with Chavez about his thoughts of how Uber is being used by the riders, people who are engaging with and using the service. And is there a shift in behavior? Is there a new behavior because of the availability of these hailing services for transportation?
Right. I mean, from my mom ordering an Uber, who's just close to 60, versus using her own car. I mean, she's getting quite comfortable with that, and that's like a big sign, because if the older generation is starting to find comfort within this, it's massive. We know the younger guys love to use Uber, love to use different forms of transportation when they're going out, but once you start seeing the older generation adopting it, this is definitely a sign of a tipping point.
All right, so we have older people using Uber now, and they're getting used to the idea of using Uber. But how does Uber see this affecting car ownership in the medium to long-term future?
But in the future, I don't believe we would own a vehicle ourselves. We're seeing a number of people continuously use Uber on a daily basis, which is definitely a lead indicator to not using your vehicle. We've also run a number of different kind of strategic partnerships which, promote the use of you using Uber on a month-to-month basis. And we've seen massive take-up in terms of some of those partnerships and those promotions. So, I mean, to answer your question, there isn't a distinctive kind of number that's showing us that this is heading in this direction for sure, because I think we'll probably see that over a larger period of time. Sure. If you had to think about it, I mean, Uber's been in South Africa for roughly about 5 years or so. And I think if you give it a little bit more time, then we're going to see that significant shift.
So as more and more people use these services, so more data becomes available. Every time you or I use an Uber or something similar, data is collected. And there's a deeper understanding of how our habits work, where and how we're using transportation and how this affects our lives, as Gervais outlines further here.
And I think is one of the key shifts. We now have a much better understanding from a data point of view in terms of where are you? How long will you take to get from point A to point B? How does this information feed in from one mode of transportation to the other, so that we as people can move across all of them seamlessly? So this in its entirety is a multimodal transportation network, where you think of a journey where you wake up in the morning and you're cycling to the Gautrain station, you're jumping into the Gautrain, you jump off the Gautrain at, let's say, Rosebank, and from there you take an Uber to the CBD, for example. Well, in that case, you could have also used the Gautrain to the Park Station, but that's essentially what's going to happen. And what I see is this happening in your everyday life. So commutes that take you that are probably going to be less than 30 kilometers on a daily basis. And then you're going to have a different type of commute. The next level of commute is going to be, across hundreds of kilometers, if not thousands of kilometers. And this is where you see new technology and new things being developed, things like what Elon Musk is looking at, like the Hyperloop, for instance, and Uber's looking at in terms of Uber Elevate, which is basically flying cars and flying vehicles. And you're going to see people moving on the ground and then shifting to those longer distances by using aircrafts, which become more efficient and also become a lot more convenient and an on-demand system in its entirety.
Think about that. Every aspect of transport being linked. So, I went to England recently, and it was a bit of a pain. I was going for a speaking engagement, so I had to book. Firstly, there's flights, and then there's a train from the airport to another station that I had to get to in order to catch a train in country. And then there were a couple of Ubers in between, different train services, different train companies, and it was a fairly daunting, a little bit intimidating to make sure you had it exactly right. Now, imagine a time or a world where all of that is linked. And similar to an app like Uber, you can say, okay, well, I'm in Johannesburg. I've got to get to Birmingham on this date. And all of those transport services are linked with each other. So there's a seamless communication between one service and the other. And you're getting exactly to where you need to be. And it's billed, it's clean, and it's uncomplicated and not intimidating. I guess this would be and will become the internet of transport. And in the next few years, we're going to see the rise of new services. Elon Musk is talking about the Hyperloop. Aston Martin are developing a flying car. For everyone who always thought, well, the future's supposed to deliver us flying cars, where are they? Well, they're now coming, because Rolls-Royce is looking at a taxi. Taxi drone service. You can fit 2 or 3 people and you can fly around. All of these become linked with each other. So transport becomes a utility. It becomes a service rather than owning a means of transport. But where is this now? Is Uber seeing a shift in behavior in their services in terms of all the data they've gotten? How are people using their services differently now?
For example, we see, we did a survey in the US specifically, where 10% of Americans actually say they're more likely to ditch their car than ditch their cell phone. Now that's huge, but also shows you our attachment to the cell phone. in South Africa specifically, we see we see a higher number of riders getting to the everyday use case. And we're seeing the trends and the pattern shift towards, I don't use an Uber, and the number of trips correlate with going to work and coming back home on a daily basis. So we're seeing an increasing trend in people using Uber more than 10 to 15 times per week.
All right, so we've seen a shift now with the use of Uber. When it was first around, it was the whole idea of, okay, great, I'm going out to party. Now we're seeing people use it for everyday uses. In fact, I was in Durban recently and spoke to an Uber driver as we were going on our commute, and I asked him how he's seeing the usage. And it's, of course, anecdotal, but he says if he needs to make small bits of money right now, he's from Chatsworth, and he would go into Chatsworth, and more people, instead of catching a minibus taxi to go do grocery shopping, will catch an Uber. So he'll pick up someone, they'll go do shopping, and then he'll pick up people who are leaving their shopping to go back home. And these are short trips, 25 Rand, 35 Rand, and he'll spend a few hours doing that, making a bit of money. So that's interesting that there's a shift to using Uber for that sort of thing. And what that tells us is that maybe we're not seeing a drastic dip in car sales or car ownership because of this, but more and more younger people's introduction to transport is Uber rather than a minibus taxi or owning their own car. And perhaps not as many people will buy cars for the first time, and they'll just understand that Uber is a service that's there how and when they need it. So as these young people who've sort of grown up using Uber come into the workplace, and for the first time they would possibly have the means to own a car, perhaps they're rethinking and saying, well, I actually don't need to own a car because I have transport available as and when I use it. But it'll be interesting to see what happens in the next 5 to 6 years in terms of people making the decision to own cars. And if you speak to people around, there are more and more people, particularly families who have 2 cars. And they're saying, why do we have 2 cars? We need 1 car. One of them can Uber to work or to go to meetings, while the car is used to transport the kids around, to get them to the kids' activities, because there you need sort of immediate access, and you need to hoard stuff in your car. If you've got kids, there's stuff that needs to be carted around. So already we're seeing a change there where we're going possibly from 2 car families to maybe just having 1 car. And on that line, I had a conversation with Samantha Perry, who's a professional in the PR industry, and she made the decision about 4 months ago to do away with her car altogether and to use Uber exclusively. So she's one of a new breed of people who are going, okay, maybe I can do away with the car and just use Uber. But how's this working out for her?
The last car I owned spent the bulk of its time sitting in the carport gathering dust anyway. So it was like, okay, well, let's try this. Let's see how it works out, because there's always stuff that you don't think about. But so far, we're about 4 months in, and yeah, so far, so good.
All right, so there's someone who's using Uber. It seems to work. And admittedly, this is not a person who needs to get around a hell of a lot. It's not someone going to an office every single day or going to meetings every single day, but certainly as and when she needs it. And it seems like it's more economically viable than owning a car. But here's the question. Is it actually possible to go Uber full time? What are the things that we're not thinking about? What makes it inconvenient? So this is what Sam had to say about what is inconvenient about using Uber exclusively.
Yeah, so it's inconvenient when you have an emergency, like I did with my 16-year-old dog the other night who had a seizure and had to go to the vet. And I was like, can you actually put a dog in an Uber? I mean, I suppose it would be up to the individual driver or car owner, but you don't, when you're having an emergency, then want to have to start negotiating with, look, dude, I really just need to get the vet. Can you, she won't pee or throw up in your car. Can we just do this thing? So I ended up calling my sister out of a business dinner and her business partner and her. There were 4 of us. It took us to get one very small dog to the vet. One issue I do seem to be having lately is where you get a trip and then the guys suddenly just decide to cancel it when they're halfway to your house, which when you're on a time schedule, like when I have to be at spinning class at 5:30 in the morning, is inconvenient because you time it exactly. I'm certainly not the only person I know who uses Uber almost exclusively, and a lot of my friends who are couples with kids have now gone 1 car, so whichever adult has the child has the car and the other one just Ubers around. So pets is a consideration. A lot of us do have them. Another thing is that Ubers that with tow bars that can accommodate bicycles and stuff would be great. because there are a lot of us who cycle. It's the new golf in this town. So that would be convenient. An issue I have had is a safety issue. I often have to go to Centurion for one of my clients, so I Uber to the Rosebank car train station. The pickup point for the Rosebank car train station is the corner of Baker and Oxford, around the corner where it's dark and not at all lit. And when I'm coming in at 8:39 at night, it's a problem. And the drivers also, because it says the pickup is corner of Oxford and Baker, the drivers don't go to Oxford and Baker because it's a bloody intersection. And they can't stop there. So they either stop at the pickup point, which is dingy and dodgy, or else they drive around until they find somewhere to stop that suits them, and then you have to go find them.
All right, so clearly it's not just a complete replacement. There is thought does have to go into it, because your behavior is now different. You have to think about things a little bit differently. But if you've never owned a car and going Uber exclusively full time, well, all the things you think about in a car, you're not having to think about with Uber. Like, my car is an extra cupboard where I keep a whole bunch of stuff. And over time, thinking and behavior toward this does shift.
Other than that, it's fine. It's great, and you do learn to plan ahead. I think most of us in South Africa are very reliant on our cars for all the stuff we cart with us and charging our cell phones. So I've now acquired a large handbag for all the stuff that I usually cart with me in my car. And I've also now started taking a power cable and a power monkey everywhere I go, because normally it's like, oh, it's fine, I'll just charge when I get in the car. Now it's a case of, okay, if I don't have charge, I can't get a car to get home. So best I plan ahead and think about this. So if you're on a time schedule, again, you have to think half an hour before you need to leave. I now need to start checking Ubers and see how many are available in the area. And it's not a bad thing planning ahead. It's just most of us kind of take it for granted that transport is this instant thing that's right there. It's like, click, okay, get in my car and go.
So it would seem anecdotally and from Samantha's experience that we're not totally there. The service as it stands right now is not, I guess, a stand-in replacement, an immediate replacement. Of course, if you need to get to meetings, if you need to get to a party, if you need to get to some sort of conference, that sort of thing, Uber is there. It's incredibly convenient and helpful. But using it exclusively perhaps is still a couple of years away as issues arise and as they get worked out. But now we come to the question of autonomous vehicles. And we've heard a lot about that over the last few years with both Uber and Google and others getting into autonomous vehicles. And I've not yet had the pleasure, the privilege, or the terrifying experience of being in an autonomous vehicle yet, but it must be quite something to see a car driving itself without you having any control. And Carte Blanche covered this recently in a recent episode, and it would seem that the first fully autonomous vehicles will arrive in South Africa in 2019. And it's not going to be on public roads. These are going to be on campuses and so on, where they can start collecting data. And those will be buses that hold a few passengers, up to about 14 people. And starting to get people used to the idea of autonomous vehicles. I've always said, well, what about the minibus taxi situation? Surely they need to go first, and then the rest can follow.
Imagine if we all had our little trains that had to jump onto the track. How much slower that train or those, that bunch of trains would need to move. And that's the same thing that's actually happening on the roads. We've got a bunch of little trains going onto the road, but you've got the highway. You can drive at 160, 170 on a highway if nothing else happens and the vehicle is fine, and you can be safe, right? But it's because of people and human error.
So that's a good point. Having all vehicles connected starts to make things safer. And the truth is that human beings are not great on the road. And if we look at the statistics in South Africa alone, over December, about 1,200 people are dying on our roads, which is just ridiculous. And there have been a couple of accidents within this year with autonomous vehicles, and that's causing concern, like, are they safe? But the truth is that an autonomous vehicles, a vehicle and fleets of autonomous vehicles are not going to kill as many people as we currently do. So when you've got cars connected with each other, now speed limits don't have to be limited. We can be traveling at 200 k's an hour because everything's talking to everything else and there's full awareness of what's going on. So the reality is that autonomous vehicles are already partly a fact. There are cars that have parking assist. There's sort of lower levels of autonomous vehicles, but they are coming. And there is absolutely going to be a time in every country in the world, including South Africa, where it won't be legal for human beings to drive cars because we are just too unsafe with it. And it is one of those things that is not going to impact us immediately. It's not today, it's not tomorrow, it's not next year, but it is coming. And when it comes, it's probably going to be sort of very sudden and all at once. But certainly by the end of next decade, I think we're going to see autonomous vehicles playing a more than dominant role on the roads of this country and around the world. There is no doubt that there is a shift underway when we think about how our access to transport. Transport has always been in places where there isn't great public transport. Well, you've got to have your own car. You couldn't afford to be without a car. But now the thinking around that is shifting. Certainly, while we don't need more than one. If we've got 2 cars, let's have one. Myself, I'm starting to consider, is it possible for me to do away with my car? And I do think the car I own now will be the last one I own. Where do you stand with this? Is the car you're driving the last you'll ever own? Have you even thought about it before? Are you thinking about it now? What would be the issues that would have to be dealt with in order for you to not be a vehicle owner? Hopefully this episode of The New Normal has made you think about it in some degree or another. If you have some thoughts about it, I'd love you to get in touch and let me know what you think. I've seen a shift away from this because, well, that in truth is impractical. You know, how do you find that one particular movie you want to watch right now or listen to a song you want to listen to right now? And we've seen instead of owning things, we would just want to have access to. So if I can say, okay, Google, or hey, Siri, play me a song, and you subscribe to Google Play Music or Spotify or any of these other services, instantly.
To know which device to use, try saying that again and include the device's name.
Well, that was Google trying to find me the song I want to listen to. So we've seen a shift away from owning physical music or physical CDs or having it on our device to just having access. So we want to be able to say, okay, Google, or hello, Siri, this is going to do that again. I'm just going to say talk to cancel.
So, but it's on silent.
Yeah, I know, but if you talk to it, it's going to talk back to you. So I'm not going to say the magic words. Yay or nay? Sitting up front with the Uber driver, yes or no?
Yes.
Interesting. The reason I ask is I read an article, 7 things that irritate your Uber driver, and one of the things was sitting up front was like, whoa, dude, sit in the back. Why should I sit up front with the Uber driver?
So this is contrary to what those articles say,
Yes.
right? And I mean, you can imagine me working for Uber. I talk to a lot of Uber drivers, right? I engage with a lot of them. Some of them actually feel very disrespected when you're sitting in the back and trying to have a conversation with them, right? So if you're in somebody, remember, this is his car,
Yes.
right? This is his car. This is not, kind of a train that you're sitting in. This is like my car. I own this car. I'm part of the platform. I'm a person. I'm just like everybody else. So a lot of people sit in the back seat. And I'm not saying I haven't done this. I have done this, but I've changed my behaviors after learning this. You sit in the back seat and now you want to have a conversation with the driver. And he's trying to drive, but he's looking up at the rearview mirror, trying to maintain eye contact. And he's trying to do that because he's trying to give you a good service and he wants to make you feel like you're welcomed in his vehicle. So
Wants the 5 stars.
exactly. And you should also be trying to get the 5 stars, right?
Sometimes when we order an Uber, it's such a short distance that I actually feel too guilty to do it.
Like we yeah.
So we only live a K or 2 from the venue, but we don't want to drive, but I feel too
And we're
guilty.
certainly not walking, but
Yeah.
so.
Do we call an Uber or don't we?
Is it a yay or nay?
Mm.
Well, I think you should still call an Uber, right? We're trying to get. I've had that feeling before. Like, man, this is going to be a short trip. But think about the holistic view. You're giving somebody one short trip, but you've been to the airport maybe 3 or 4 times in the month, right? And given somebody else a long trip. So that eventually evens itself out. If you're using Uber once a month and you're taking only those types of trips, then I would be like, okay, maybe this is, you know.
This is like a double.
So just a double-edged sword.
Yeah,
It's also kind of me trying to make you ride more indirectly.
Get your ass into an Uber.
Yeah.
I'm like, I don't know if you can actually put a dog in an Uber. She's a little dog, and she is.
We have to wait for the ice cream van to.
It comes through.
It's wet.
It comes through every day.
I was kind of enjoying that.
Yeah, like, hey.
That's where mine room.
I mean, that's an ambitious ice cream truck with
Yeah,
in the
There's
middle
just
of winter.
there's a school. Yeah, I was gonna say there's a school here as well.
Okay.
There's a lot of schools in the neighborhood. He comes past. That's why I was tuning it out because he comes past every day. It's not. It's part of the. Yeah, he literally comes past every day. I'm like, oh, it must be nearly 1 o'clock. The ice cream man's coming.